Hello, everyone. When DL Hughley finally opened up about why Bernie Mac was considered the most feared comedian in Hollywood, it wasn't because Bernie was dangerous or reckless. It was because he was one of the last men in the industry who refused to bow, refused to fake, refused to play the game, and that raw refusal to compromise made him both legendary and intimidating in a world built on politics, favors, alliances, and unspoken rules. And as DL tells it, the true story of Bernie Mac is not just about one man's rise from the gritty streets of Chicago to the pinnacle of comedy, but about how a man with uncompromising integrity, brutal honesty, and a steel backbone became a force that Hollywood could not control, could not censor, and could never forget. To understand why Bernie Mac was feared, DL takes us back to the 1970s and 80s on Chicago's South Side, where Bernie, born Bernard Jeffrey McCullough, developed his fearless comedic style by performing in clubs where silence could get you booed off stage and hesitation could get you heckled into oblivion. And Bernie learned early that if you didn't command the room would swallow you alive. So he built his voice, his presence, and his persona on pure authenticity, speaking truth without sugarcoating, calling out hypocrisy and telling jokes rooted in real pain, real struggle, and real life. And when he brought that rawness to Def Comedy Jam in 1992, walking on stage in that iconic white suit, declaring, "I ain't scared of you," Hollywood saw something it had never seen before. A comedian whose confidence wasn't an act, whose delivery wasn't rehearsed, and whose fearlessness wasn't for show. And from that moment on, Bernie Mac became something that executives both admired and dreaded, because you couldn't shape him, couldn't manipulate him, couldn't force him into stereotypes, and couldn't tell him what to say or how to say it. DL Hughley has said many times that Bernie Mac walked into every room like a man who had already been through worse than anything Hollywood could throw at him. And that's what unsettled people. Bernie didn't need them as much as they needed him. His comedy wasn't reliant on approval. His success wasn't dependent on fitting into the industry's narrow expectations, and when producers tried to pitch him safer, friendlier, or more polished characters, Bernie would simply say, "That ain't me," and walk away, a move most artists were too afraid to even consider. But DL reveals that what truly made Bernie feared was his loyalty to truth, even when truth made people uncomfortable. If a deal was unfair, Bernie said it. If an executive was disrespectful, Bernie confronted. If the industry tried to pit comedians against each other, Bernie refused the drama, and many were shaken by how unwilling he was to sell out or play along with Hollywood politics, creating a reputation so strong that even the biggest producers knew Bernie wouldn't bend. And this unfiltered integrity followed him into the original Kings of Comedy, where DL Hughley, Steve Harvey, Cedric the Entertainer, and Bernie Mac toured the nation, selling out arenas and rewriting the rules of stand-up. And DL often explained that even among the four giants, Bernie's energy was different. A gravity that pulled you in, a presence that made even veteran performers step up their game, because when Bernie hit the stage, you were watching a man who performed like he had nothing to lose. And that kind of fearlessness is rare, terrifying to competitors, and deeply respected by those who truly understood the craft. Hollywood also feared the fact that Bernie was unpredictable, not in behavior, but in spirit. He didn't chase trends, didn't soften his material, didn't fake humility, and didn't pretend to like people he didn't respect. And DL says Bernie's honesty could cut through a room like a blade, because when people asked for feedback, Bernie didn't hand out compliments. He told the truth, sometimes blunt, sometimes hilarious, but always real. And that truthfulness intimidated actors, comedians, executives, and even directors who weren't used to someone confronting them without hesitation. And yet, behind that fearless exterior was a man full of compassion, someone who took care of his family, treated his friends with loyalty, and protected people who couldn't protect themselves, a side of Bernie that Hollywood rarely saw because his comedic persona overshadowed his gentler nature. And DL reveals that Bernie feared a legacy that didn't reflect his truth, which is why he pushed himself so hard, even when his health began declining, and it's why his sudden passing in 2008 from complications of pneumonia devastated not just the comedy world, but the entire entertainment industry, because no one was ready to lose the man who had single-handedly redefined authenticity in comedy. DL Hughley often says that Bernie Mac wasn't feared because he was loud or aggressive. He was feared because he was real, because he didn't flinch, didn't pretend, and didn't change himself to be accepted. And in an industry built on illusion, a man who lives by truth is the most dangerous man of all. And today, years after his death, Bernie Mac's legend continues to grow. Not because he was perfect, but because he was fearless, honest, disciplined, and determined to live his life without shame, without regret, and without compromise. And as DL puts it, Hollywood may have lost a comedian, but the world lost a once-in-a-generation force who proved that the most powerful weapon any entertainer can have is authenticity. And the reason Bernie Mac was feared is simple. He was the one man Hollywood could never change, never predict, and never silence. And that is exactly why he remains one of the greatest to ever do it. Thanks for watching.